Welcome everyone to another episode of Kiwi Talks. I am speaking to a man that I'm a huge fan of. He's found a way to reverse engineer a lot of the sound effects within the Metroid Prime Trilogy. He's found the samples for it. He's used it to create his own stuff, as well as remakes of older Metroid stuff. Synamax, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Reece?
I'm good. So why don't we start off with how this journey started in terms of how you ended up making the Metroid stuff, how you found the samples. Why don't you just give me the rundown?
Sure. So basically in around 2017, I found this Discord on the internet where these group of people, they figure out the samples used to make up video game soundtracks. And I found that there was this whole world of sample libraries and synth gear that essentially comprises there's a lot of reusing of sounds and whatnot. And basically you realize, because sometimes you'll play a video game and you're like, I've heard that sound before. Where have I heard that? And so a lot of people caught on to that, and so a lot of people are that I know are devoting time to figuring out, okay, this composer had this gear and therefore, use this preset. And so this whole culture of recreating and restoring music, especially for games that are like 16-bit, that have like low fidelity samples, just because of the limitations of the hardware at the time. So a lot of people, now that we found the original samples where a lot of these sounds come from, we're able to do what's called a restoration, as it's called. And basically, you end up, you basically restore the sound. And so that was really fascinating to me. And I was like, well, wait, if people figure out this stuff for, Mario and stuff, well, maybe I could figure out what kind of gear Kenji Yamamoto used for the Metroid Prime soundtracks. And so this was much easier said than done, because it was like,
I imagine
it's literally like a needle in a haystack, right? You don't know where to start. Here's this Japanese composer. I have no idea what his studio looks like, what his gear is. It's just, it's a shot in the dark. Some people manage, they're really well versed with gear, and they go, oh yeah, that's and I'm like, I don't know. So at first I thought he used like Logic Pro or something like that, used samples from that, because I thought I heard some pretty similar choir sounds. Again, this was back in 2017, so this was like when I first started out, and I didn't know anything about sample finding and whatnot. I've been writing music since 2004, but like it wasn't until 2017 that I really started to like look into that. And then my first hit was this. Someone found Uncivilized Grooves, which is the sample library that came out in 2000. It's really, really obscure. I've never seen it on eBay since. The only time I saw it on eBay, I got it, and I've never seen it on there since. But all those samples ended up becoming the backbone for the percussion and the for the music. And once I figured out, once someone on the Discord uploaded that and let me know about it, I was like, okay, this is actually kind of possible. I might be able to. So I tried recreating the Parasite Queen beat with the samples there. I think you have the Flood sample.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I went ahead and I sent you a couple of those samples so we could hear them on the show.
Yeah. Let's see. Which one should I play? That is the question.
The Flood one should be good.
The Flood one. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I will do that right now. Yeah, so that's an interesting sample, I find, because obviously it's got a lot of the standard and the weird pipe sounds that became iconic with it. So when you got that CD, because obviously some of those samples, as I've seen and heard, they already have a reverb on them or a delay on them.
Yes.
Right. So do you have to cut them and then just try and shorten them as much as possible, or do you leave the delay in there? Because I know when you've recreated tracks, you've used these samples.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating because when I use these samples, you get the vibe, and then you compare them to like the actual song. You get the vibe of like what Yamamoto-san was thinking when he was working on the track, right? And you're like, okay, so he did use the delay baked in. And it's like really interesting stuff that like I normally wouldn't do, right? I would like just isolate the sample and then add my own delay to it. But he actually used the delay in the original sample for some of the stabs in that flood sample. And that really surprised me because it was like, that's a completely different tempo to what the actual song is. And I don't know if that was done because if it's like budgetary constraints and he was hurrying or something like that. But cause that's the other thing too. It's like, there's just so much music. Yeah, it's just really fascinating. Cause like sometimes he'll snip samples. So that way it's just, there's no delay at all. And it's just the dry sample itself. Basically the method of attack, as it were, with the Uncivilized Groove CD is you basically, the loops come with their own stems, so you just find the stem that you need that has the sample that you want, and you just isolate that and trim it. But there was one track, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the monster's name. The ice monster boss in Phendrana Drifts.
Shegoth, is it?
The Shegoths are the ice.
Thardus?
Thank you. Thardus, yes. How could I forget the Galaxy Quest monster name?
Pretty much.
There's the one loop M room, I believe. The guy, Kenji Yamamoto, just used it as is. No editing whatsoever. It's like, not even time stretching or anything. It's just the raw sample. He just plopped it into the song. So there's really interesting things like that. It's like stuff that's like, wow, he just, more often than not, he doesn't even like pitch stuff differently. It's usually a lot of times on C. He'll trigger samples right on C because it just happened to be there on the orbit or whatnot. It's so you get this really cool fascination of like, sensation of like, oh wow, I could see why he did that. Oh, he increased the attack on this a little bit to kind of make it a little bit more spookier. I get that, and going through that mindset and that methodology, it helps, I think, kind of reassure you like, hey, okay, cool, I am doing music production right, because this is stuff that I would do too. You know what I mean? It's kind of like a feedback loop, as it were.
Yeah, that's true. Because I think when I first heard the soundtrack, I sensationalized it in my head. I'm thinking, he must have designed these sounds from scratch. And you start going into the detail, obviously as a musician, right? You do this. And then to find out it's something real basic, it's kind of the hype that you built up in your head. It's kind of a bit sad because you're like, but at the same time, it's like, okay, as you said, it's something quite basic. So sometimes doing stuff very simple is the best way. Simple is more effective. It can be more
Absolutely.
effective. Yeah. So you don't need to go and design all these sounds. I mean, yeah, in Kenji Yamamoto's case, he was probably under constraints, so he probably wouldn't have been able to do that anyway. But that makes it easier for you in terms of trying to redesign or remake a track.
No, absolutely. Quick aside, another artist that who heavily relies on sample libraries is Akira Yamaoka from Silent Hill.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the similar thing too, because people who initially hear those soundtracks are like, wow, the sound design of this is amazing and stuff. And then people kind of get the magic is kind of lost a little bit when it's like, oh, he didn't do all that sound design. He just grabbed samples from sample libraries. And to that, I say that doesn't take away anything. Yamaoka-san took these samples and rearranged them in a way and used them in a way to make this music that's so evocative and everything. and and then add into budget and time constraints of making a product on time and a deadline and everything. There's no other logical answer than to use presets and samples, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
So was there a before and after that? So when you started building the sound library for Metroid Prime, did that change the fundamental way that you did music or the way you did sound effects?
I never had like hardware before this. In fact, I didn't even have a proper MIDI controller before this. I only got like my real 49 key MIDI controller like in 2019. Before that, I was this was all hobbyist, and I would just, use my computer keyboard for a MIDI keyboard. And, but now that I've been very, very fortunate enough to obtain the sound modules, the EMU sound modules and the microKORG, it's got me way more familiar with MIDI. It's got me way more familiar with recording audio. So it's also shown me like, again, like when you recreate music, you go like, okay, he put this sound over here, so that way there's a seamless loop. It's, again, little tricks like that really help get you in the mindset of what needs to be done for video game composing and composing in general. Figuring out like, okay, like what does this song bring to the table, both in terms of excitement, but also like emotional content, and so it goes. To answer your question, I know I answered that in a really roundabout way, but
that's all right.
To answer your question is, yes, I think the equipment has changed the way I produce a little bit. But in other ways it hasn't, because I also want to make the distinction that I have my original music and then I have my Metroid music, right? Because they are... I realize my original production style sense is much more similar to like someone like, again, Akira Yamaoka, or, much more sample base. But whereas Yamamoto-san's all, synth module base with a little bit of samples here and there. So it's a lot more off-board, hardware setup. So, but it gets me out of my comfort zone, right? So it's like, it helps me think in different ways, and when it comes to music production.
But what do you prefer? Do you prefer doing the music production, or do you prefer sound design?
They both. I love both. Sound design, you could do some really amazing stuff with sound design, and I think sometimes I might actually lean a little more towards sound design, just because I just love the idea of working with drones and samples. One of my all-time favorite bands groups is the Art of Noise from the 1980s. And J.J. Janchalik, who worked with the Fairlight sequencer there, sampler, wow. He loads these crazy samples of like grunts and these insane drums and stuff that were so industrial sounding, and yet he was able, the whole Art of Noise team were able to make this music that's just so artificial sounding yet melodic, and so I've always liked the idea of creating music with unconventional instruments or unconventional sound design. So, but to create that music, you need to do the sound design first, and oftentimes I'm usually, like, whenever I'm listening to a track, I'm often listening to the minute details in the background, going like, oh yeah, I like that reverb there. I've noticed that my listening, as I've grown, being a casual video game soundtrack listener to a person who's, been doing music production for a while now, I've noticed how my tastes have matured, as well as my ear. My ear is more sensitive to the minute frequency changes and things of that nature. So that's something that I found really fascinating as well.
So you managed to reverse engineer the file format. Was it AGSC? I think it is. With
yes,
the Metroid Prime Trilogy?
I was yes, that is correct. So first off, I have a couple of friends. They run what's called URDE. It is essentially a PC emulator for Metroid Prime, and they're actually reverse engineering the whole game and going to try to make it legally playable on PC. And it's they were working on the sound format for that for the game, and there were several theories on how the sound format worked, and so one of the programmers on the project mentioned, hey, I believe they used MusiX as the sound engine. I think I read that in an article somewhere. And so it's like, okay, let's look at some code, example code from MusiX from because we had, there was some source files from an example MusiX SDK project. And so by comparing the chunks in those files and looking at the AGSC file format in Metroid Prime, I was recognizing patterns. Mind you, I've never, at this point, I never done any hex editing. This was the very first hex editing I've ever done. And I was just diving in, looking at looking at the hex characters and going, do I see any patterns? Right? And I look back on it now and I'm still kind of amazed that I was able to do that. Not to toot my own horn, but just considering because before that, I was just on forums asking people hey, can you reverse engineer this? Can you do this for me? Can you, and stuff's never going to get done when you do that, man. Sometimes you got to do it yourself. And sometimes you just need that determination and to just open up that program and just dive in. And I was recognizing patterns. And at first they were no, I don't think that's it. I'm no, look, this file here looks like this chunk here. And it turns out the AGSC file is 4 MusiX files in one. You see, the way the MusiX sound engine works is that you have what's called sound macros, which are basically little scripts that denote the pitch of the sound, how loud it is, the panning, the priority of the sound. And essentially, I found the chunk for that, and I found the chunk for the samples, and so once we figured out that what basically Retro Studios did was take the 4 files and then put them into one big file. And then once we figured that out, we were able to reverse engineer it, and I was able to insert sound effects. It took a little bit of work, but I was able to insert some sound effects into the game as well. So that was really cool.
Because do you know much about coding, or did you prior to that? Because obviously when you're looking at it, it probably looks like the Matrix code, right? Just a whole bunch of weird numbers and letters.
Yeah, no, it's and at times it still is very alien. I know a lot more about hex now, and I was also able to figure out a little bit of some other video game formats as well. So while I admit I'm not great with coding. I can read code, but I can't write it. But in terms of debugging and hex editing, it's now become a little bit of a hobby now, because I've also reverse engineered a little bit, not big things, but I've also, I've looked into going back to that Fairlight sampler that Art of Noise used. That's being emulated on MAME now, and so I've been looking into the reverse engineering of that and figuring out how some of the idiosyncrasies of that computer works. And so it's cool how Metroid Prime's kind of been in my life for such a long time, and it's kind of influenced by other ways of approaching different hobbies, I guess.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. I mean, that's why I have a lot of respect for people like David Wise, who actually wrote music in Hex. They actually wrote it via code. Yeah, it's crazy. It
is crazy because there was a video game that I reverse engineered a little bit of the music format, and looking at the MIDI data, and I had to go in and remove a couple of bytes of hex, and I'm I can't imagine someone like David Wise going in and writing music, this, which is again another really similar process to what Koji Kondo would do with Super Mario Brothers, and they had to write their own assembly drivers, like their own NES drivers in assembly code, and I mean, not even an object oriented language like C. So I have a lot of respect for those guys, because that's just and it kind of like it is today. You kind of have to have a lot of hats, to get stuff done nowadays. And that was kind of the same mentality back then.
So have you attempted to make any music in Hex just to challenge yourself, or you're like, oh no, hell with this?
I was able to, I've done, there's tracker stuff. That's almost like writing in Hex. It's a lot easier, of course, but it's at the same time, there's you have those walls of numbers flying by and stuff. And that could be a little bit daunting at times for me personally. But no, the tracker stuff is probably the closest thing I've done to what closest to Hex writing, I guess.
So in regards to the actual music samples, because Kenji Yamamoto used stuff like Orbit 3, he used some Korg stuff. Is it the Proteus 2000, 3000?
Yeah. The Proteus 2000. That's 2000.
Correct. Yeah. So obviously, how the heck did you find out that he was using this equipment? And then obviously there's probably stuff that he used that was just the standard sample, but then stuff would have been EQ'd or modulated.
Right.
Yeah. So how did you work out all of this stuff?
Well, so once I figured out that Uncivilized Grooves was the sample library, I was like, well, there's got to be other stuff that's been used, and Paper Mario has patches from the Proteus 2000 that are used in Metroid Prime. And so I was like, okay, these are definite sounds that have been reused. These aren't just sounds that Kenji Yamamoto created. Again, this was my own self-discovery of like, this is how composers work. They don't, use, they don't sound design everything. So it was literally like a needle in a haystack situation. My only lead was the fact that Super Metroid had samples from the EMU Proteus sound module. The EMU Proteus sound module is a staple of the 90s, because it was one of those. It was a sound module is like a sampler, except it's just a little more robust, and it has all the sounds on it's essentially a rompler. It's a better way of putting it. So all the sounds are on the ROM, and you play it through the MIDI keyboard. And they were like workhorses in studios, because they had all these sounds, and so you hear them on cartoon soundtracks and all this stuff in the 90s all the time. And so some of those samples showed up in Super Metroid. So I was like, okay, well, maybe Yamamoto-san used EMU stuff into Metroid Prime. It's a theory. And so I managed to someone uploaded a YouTube video with a demo for the Orbit 3. And I was like, I'll give this a shot. And the first sound I heard was the noise hits. I'll pull it up right now. It was like, when I heard these, I was like, let me cue it up. There we go. I heard this. And that just like, I knew I hit the gold. I knew I hit the jackpot. And then the one right next to it is literally my favorite sound from the Metroid Prime Trilogy, is this Agon pad.
That's used heavily in Metroid Prime 2.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that specific pad.
Yeah,
did he do anything to that pad, or is that just how it is?
That's so one of the few tracks I've created from Metroid Prime is Agon Oasis, which is where this patch is used. There's a very, very subtle modulation wheel change. It's super subtle. I had to listen to the track several times over to catch that, because I was listening to it and I'm going, something sounds off. I don't know what it is, but it something's not adding up. And literally I was just grabbing the knobs on the front of the Orbit 3 going, which one is it? Is it cutoff? Is it resonance? Is it the attack? And a lot of times it's just guesswork, man. Just trying to go, okay, I have this sound here right now, but was there anything else added to it? I'm running into that problem right now with, I'm recreating the music from the Spider Guardian Ing boss music. And there's this really cool choir that plays, and I can't figure out the exact sound because like all the choir samples in the Orbit 3 kind of sound the same, and there's like a chorus effect on it, and I don't know if that chorus effect is on the Orbit 3 or if it's on outboard gear, like on an effects pedal. So I honestly don't know, like if I found the exact sample, sometimes I realize I might gonna have to have, close enoughs, right? But to answer your question again, like, yeah, sometimes Flagra is another good example where he slightly modified the attack of the one sound, and it's really so minute stuff like that can make or break a track. And that's something I was really fascinated. Like, he'll even throw in, Yamamoto-san will throw in like ghost notes in the rhythm and stuff. So there's a lot of minute details that's, I found quite surprising for a video game soundtrack, honestly.
Because he'll use a lot of layers as well. Because I know you recreated Torvus Bog. And obviously there's the video online for people who haven't seen it, and it's got a breakdown in Fruity Loops of all the different layers that you used. I mean, there's heaps. What is it, like 18, 19, 20 or something?
It's complex, and what was really even more fascinating, that I wrote that Torvus Bog recreation with the software version of these hardware modules with the VST plugin. So, cause that's quick aside. I want to again express my gratitude to Speedy for helping me get the Orbit 3. She told me about the Orbit 3 that was on sale on a site, because when I started making the videos, I was talking about the Orbit 3, right? And I realized that may be driving up the price of it, and because they're already really uncommon. You see, what happened is the sounds in here were designed by Rob Patton, who's a Dutch sound designer. He didn't license these sounds when they re-released these in software form. So you can only get the Orbit 3 in hardware form. I mean, well, okay, no, I take that back. There's the sounds they recreated for the emulator X3, so you can emulate it in software form. I take that back. But there's a caveat to that. I'll get to that. So, yeah. But to like, so right now, commercially, you cannot get the Orbit 3 sounds anywhere right now. So I was very, very fortunate to get an Orbit 3 right before the prices started jumping really, really crazy. Like the last time I saw on eBay, they wanted like $1,100.
And how much did they retail for before?
I think it was like somewhere between 500, 700, and they were. Yeah, so and I got mine for 500, but it was. But I realized how incredibly lucky. And the other thing that I was really lucky with was that there's an Extreme Lead ROM. There's three sound modules that I believe that Yamamoto-san used. There was the Orbit 3, the Protus 2000, and then the Extreme Lead 1. The Extreme Lead 1's annoying because there's variants of the ROM. So there's the Extreme Lead 1, and then there's the XL1 Turbo, which has more, it's ever so slightly different. And I realized that, and rarer, and I realized that Yamamoto-san used the XL1 Turbo. But I was very fortunate when I had the money to purchase the ROM for it. I was like, I found one on eBay. I was like, this is an okay price. I guess, maybe this is it. Maybe I can work around with it. And I just happened, by chance, by luck, happened to get the right rarer variant ROM. So it's almost like fate.
Yeah, I guess it is, isn't it? Yeah, makes sense. So what's the plan going forward? Are you going to recreate every single track? Are you going to recreate Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion and Metroid Prime Star? What's the goal here?
Right now I'm just enjoying the fact that I could recreate music and I can make music that sounds like Metroid Prime. I realize, as I mentioned earlier, like the amount of music to recreate is just astronomical. And again, it gives me a further appreciation to, all these composers that work in video games, just the amount of output they have to produce for these projects. And so that being said, I realize that it's going to be very, very difficult at a day job in of itself to be able to find all the samples, find all the presets and the patches, and recreate the whole soundtrack, because there's the soundtrack was mastered in 32 kilohertz sampling rate. So it's not like a 16-bit game, right? It's 32 kilohertz is not great, but it's better than 22, it's better than 16, it's better than 8. And so at the same time, I don't want to make it sound like I'm giving up on Metroid music, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm just basically saying, like, I realize that there is the effort to try to recreate the whole soundtracks and stuff. It is, again, just astronomically high, and with a J job and everything, that's
fair enough. Fair enough.
But that being said, tracks like Torvus Box, tracks that really mean a lot to me, that that songs that have influenced my creative output, I definitely love to visit and take a look at, because again, I feel like I'm in his shoes recreating the music, right? And it's like you get a really interesting introspective of the music production behind it. You get it kind of, it's like the Wizard of Oz, just pulling back the curtain.
Yeah, for sure. Have you thought about maybe starting a Kickstarter or speaking to OC Remix or trying to get the word out there? So maybe, I don't know, it would be possible to fund this, so you'd actually could set the time aside to actually do it. It's if you wanted to do it.
That's the interesting thing. For the longest time, I was actually like kind of a little bit upset that I was the Metroid guy, right? Like, I want my original music to kind of stand out and stuff. But then I realized, there's a lot worse things in the world to be known as the Metroid guy, like, yeah, and so I've really kind of embraced it. And am I going to write Metroid music forever? No, but I don't know, like, if a Kickstarter or something, that would be crazy, because, like, I don't want to get into the legal ramifications of Nintendo or anything like that. I don't know what would be involved, if anything. But no, that hasn't really crossed my mind yet of fundraising or crowdfunding for something like that. That would be cool, though. I would have to look into that.
Yeah.
Never thought of that.
Because I don't think they could legally shut it down. Well, I suppose they could legally shut it down if you are recreating it from scratch, I suppose, every single track.
Yeah.
Particularly the Metroid Prime stuff, because it's copyrighted with the game. But it's hard to say. So, like, Andrew Holsholt, he did like a remake of Doom with his guitars and stuff and tried to modernize the sound basically from its MIDI days. And now he is the composer on the DLC for Doom Eternal. So, who knows?
Oh.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So the other way would be maybe PayPal or something, but yeah, I mean,
right.
Nintendo are funny like that, right? So you don't really know, but like they haven't done anything so far. I mean,
right.
Have you thought about approaching Retro Studios and see what they say?
So many people have come up to me asked me like, you should talk to Retro. You should let them know. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to reach out to them because I haven't done it yet because frankly, my, real life and stuff like that. But I also like the fact that I'm very humbled by the fact that people have said that to me and reach out to them. And it's like, cause it makes me feel really good. So yeah, no, and I've worked on minor projects before and stuff like that. So I've had a little bit of experience with composing and whatnot. But yeah, no, if they want to send me MIDI data and I'll record it for them, just in case if they don't have Orbit 3s anymore. Cause that's the other thing too. This is, 20-year-old technology here. I don't know if they, cause that's something to bring into consideration with like, are they going to reuse these sounds for Metroid Prime 4?
I hope so.
Yeah. These sounds are, I like to call them the sound palette. Like Yamamoto-san uses like the same presets over and over again for specific areas. So like if you listen to the instruments and samples used for Tallon Overworld Depths, and then you compare it to Torvus Bog, these two rainy terrains, they have very similar presets and samples and whatnot. So I found that really fascinating. And both Prime 1 and 2 and 3, they all, if you want ethereal sounds. So that's, I found really fascinating, is like the sound palette concept, right? Of reusing familiar patches and whatnot for different for the similar locales and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that actually caught my ear when I first played Metroid Prime is because I'm a big fan of hip hop, and I was noticing that a lot of the melody or the samples that were being used was stuff that like Dr. Dre would use when he was creating beats, and I was like, hang on a sec. But the thing is with it is it has such a unique soundtrack that no other game sounds like. And that's just a testament to Nintendo and all of their composers, because almost every franchise is like that. It has a signature sound, like even Splatoon, which is their newest stuff, has a very, very unique sound to it. Because especially these days with the way gaming has gone, and video game soundtracks tend to be a bit more cinematic now, right? So they're not as distinctive.
Right.
But that's still very, very distinctive. And the reason why I say this is because as a musician, I know how much time it would have taken for you to find this stuff, then recreate it from scratch. Like, it must have taken hours, like months, years in some cases. It's crazy. That's why, like, when I first heard, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy must have invested so much time into this. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I hope he's gotten some money or something from it, because it's a hell of a lot of time to invest in just for a hobby. So if something can come from it, So I just chase things, man. Like, you got nothing to lose by contacting Retro. Like, nothing, really.
No, right. What's it's not going to hurt to ask,
Yeah.
Dude, I gotta tell you, like, this past year, so much stuff has happened in my life where I'm like, this isn't just coincidence. This is like, I really do feel like there's going to be cool stuff on the horizon. I don't know what, but I'm just along for the ride. I'm just going to ride the wave and see what happens. And right now, our paths have met, and I feel really good about it, man.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, I spoke to Mick Gordon not too long ago, and off air, I told him that, like, I compose and stuff, and I did do a video game portfolio, and he actually gave me some sound advice if I wanted to become a video game composer. So I'll pass that on to you. And basically he said that you just find out who the sound person is or who does the engineering for the audio for any game company, and then you just send them your portfolio. That's the best way to do it. So if that's something you wanted to pursue further, like, just you don't even like just retro, obviously, but then you could also contact other video game companies because it could be something that you end up doing full time.
No, absolutely. I would absolutely love to have a composing gig full time. It's my dream, honestly, you know, and to be able to have a living off of that. I've written music for, you know, short films and stuff like that. So I know I can do it, you know, I have to admit, like, you know, when I started writing for the longest time, like back in 2004, for the longest time until, you know, I started doing this Metroid thing, I was just a hobby, right? And now that I've you know, a lot of stuff has changed for everyone recently, you know, with the pandemic and stuff. And I think a lot of time that, you know, I'm going on a little personal rant here, but, you know, like, you know, it gives you some introspection, right? And I had to go through a lot of introspection with myself and my music and who I am as a person. And that really helped out because now I feel like for the first time in my life that I'm writing music the way I'm supposed to be writing it. I'm not doing it just for fun. I am doing it just for fun. That's the most important thing, but I'm doing it with a purpose too. I'm not just like willy nilly. I'm like, I want to make music that can entertain people and make people happy. And so at the end of the day, if you know, if you know, a composition career or something doesn't work out, I'm still very happy with the fact that, you know, you reached out to me about my music. I mean, to me, that's success right there.
Well, hey, I very much admire you, you know, and I think it's cool what you're doing. Did COVID change anything for you in terms of how you did anything, in terms of your music and sound design or anything? Because obviously the whole world's changed, but with this sort of stuff, it's one person confined to a room, right? So yeah, I'd imagine it would largely still stay the same.
It's pretty much been the same. Again, I've been very grateful that I have an at-home job before everything happened, so the transition was fortunately pretty seamless. But in terms of music, no, it's kind of always been pretty much the same. Fortunately, I think if anything that has changed, now that I think about it, it's probably the emotional impact, the emotional connection I have with music now, you know? Like, I think before then it was just like, oh, hey, it's music. And then, it's funny because, you know, my wife, she loves music too. And she has this, it's funny because like, I know all this stuff about music production and she has this whole vast knowledge about music culture and all these, you know, great bands and groups of people I've never heard of before. And it's like exploding my mind with this knowledge of music. And it's like, this is inspiring me. This is giving me new ideas. I never thought of writing music this way before. So it was kind of like really cool to get that introspective. Again, I've been using that word a lot.
That's all right. It's a powerful word.
It is a powerful word.
Yeah.
But it really is, again, just like you got to have that balance of like immersing yourself in the music culture, but also like, you know, immersing yourself in the technical side of things and finding that nice equilibrium. Yeah,
very much so. Very much so. So I have to get you to play some more Metroid Prime stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So whatever you've got for me or the people listening.
Sure. So we're going to fire up the Agon pad again because I just love the sound so much.
It's so good, eh? And then I suppose, is it the same, like with the, because is that Agon Wastes? Is it? Or is that the
yes.
Yeah, Agon Waste. So does he use the higher pitch sounds at all?
Yeah, like that's actually it's interesting because it's kind of like a bit of both. Sometimes he goes higher. Sometimes sounds change really drastically in the higher pitch. For example, I'll pull up on the extreme lead this Byzantine Bell preset. This is used in the Frigate Escape. And everyone, if I play the lower notes, I gotta switch MIDI channels. If I play the lower notes, it's a cool sound, But if I go to the higher notes, completely different sound. But that's it's that jangle sound effect from the Frigate Escape or the Frigate Orpheon from the first game.
Okay, so there are times where he uses the same sound but just at a higher pitch. That will probably be quite common, and he probably uses it on the same track sometimes as well.
One of the best ones, the best use of let's see here, 20. One of the best. There's a preset here called More Senses. Here we go. More Senses is amazing because it's an extremely versatile preset that Yamamoto-san uses a lot, both low and high. This is actually pretty funny. So high end, it's used for, again, Frigate Orpheon. But if you go lower, it's also the intro pad for Torvus Bog. You go lower still.
That's awesome.
You go lower still, it's the drone for the pirate lab in Phendrana Drifts. So again, going back, go ahead.
I was going to say he uses those drone type sounds quite a lot, right? Where he will hold one note, for like 1 second or 2 seconds, like
yeah.
Here's
another one.
Is it Phendrana Drifts? Is that the opening intro? Yeah.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. It's Metroid Prime really introduced this idea of a wall of sound, right? Or like a drone, right? Just this bed. And let me see if I can pull up one more. There's this idea of just having something in the background to kind of just give your ears this ambience, this space, much like how reverb, when you add reverb to something, it just gives this space, this ambience that really makes you feel like you're there. Well, this is kind of the same psychological concept. So let me go ahead. There's BPM. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah,
it's fascinating stuff.
And that's that one's called BPM Love 1. And it's just these random presets, and it's that's in the background for the title screen for the first game.
Yeah.
But having something interesting in the background adds so much that's to me that's a really cool music production tip where you're writing something for psytrance or something or hip hop or whatever, just having I wish I could remember the track, but there was some early 90s hip hop track I was listening to, and it had this really nice city ambience in the background, sirens and stuff. And it was I was freaking out for a moment. where's the sirens coming from? So little things like that just really add so much to your music production.
Do you have the I think it's Icefield, isn't it? The Icefield preset. That's the iconic Phendrana Drifts melody line, pretty much.
Yes. The mic. I have a microKorg, but the original synth that was used for Metroid Prime was the Korg MS-2000, and the microKorg is just the relative of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull up. Let's see here. So
yeah, it's such an iconic sound, though, isn't it?
No, it really is, and it's just a white noise burst, something like you hear from it almost reminds me of the Dreamcast opening, and there's the other. I loaded the other one earlier. This one's called Past Mine, and this one's really interesting because it's what's called a split, whereas the preset has two. It's like two presets in one. So basically, what's going on is that you have on the high end of the keyboard you have this whistle, and on the low end you have a pad. And so when I was loading the sysx data from the MS-2000 and putting it into the microKorg, I was just getting that pad, but I want that whistle, which is used a lot in Metroid Prime. A little bit rusty.
yeah. It's a sine wave, isn't it? Yeah. But that's
it's just
that's really common in 90s hip hop as well. That exact whistle sine wave sound.
It's really there's actually two sine waves. He uses this Past Mine one, which is kind of like a retro Tangerine Dream sort of vibe, right? And then he uses this other one called Turn Wheel, which is very, very reminiscent to hip hop. So there's, and I'm playing at an octave lower too. I'm but I do a lot more sequencing than playing in real life, as you could tell. But nevertheless, it's. So when I first heard that growing up, I was like, to me, that's like so weird and out of place yet fitting, And it's because when I first heard it, it was like, wow, like you said, it just sounds something right out of hip hop. But I like how, again, it's that ideology of like using instruments unconventionally. Something that's usually reserved for a particular genre, and then here it is in a sci-fi video game,
Yeah, totally. And sometimes it's something very simple. I mean, when I was going through the Uncivilized Grooves samples, I'll play it now, is the Prime one, which is awesome, right? That's the name that they used. So with the Prime one, when I play it, yeah, so you can hear the Phazon Mines drum track in the background. So it's crazy that he would have just taken that sample, then just chucked some kind of drone pad string thing on top of it, and then I think there's a choir as well, and then that's pretty much it.
Yeah, no,
and then
there's
you've got it. You've got the entire track, and it works well.
There's the pad there is phase flips from the Proteus 2000. No, that's not it. But no, yeah.
So good, so good.
There are some tracks, I will admit, that are a little bit easier to recreate than others. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, you could probably recreate Phazon Mines pretty easily, I'm sure. It would take you, I don't know, maybe a couple of hours. Possibly.
Yeah.
If you knew exactly if you could break down the particular drum track. And then,
right.
Yeah.
I actually tried recreating Phazon Mines a little bit, and what happened was, I'm not sure what exactly they did to the drum loop, but it was ever so slightly different. I had to do all this chopping to match it up with the original song, and I'm not sure. I never was happy with that approach. I haven't re-released that. I haven't re-released, but I haven't released the track yet. Because of that, I wanted to see if there was if they approached it a different way, a little more accurate way. But that's my perfectionistic side of me. So sometimes I just gotta let the tracks go. And it's this is the best I can do. But
hey man, I totally understand. As a musician myself, even with these podcasts, sometimes I'm I don't even want to release this. It's not up to my standard. But I just end up doing it anyway because even if I don't like it, there's bound to be someone that does. Right.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the right mentality to have,
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. So I totally understand because when you're a perfectionist, creative people, right? We tend to be like that.
Yeah.
So it's you just see all the flaws in it. And apparently it was like that for a lot of the designers on the original Metroid Prime because they were working on the game for so long. They hated the game. They didn't even like it because all they saw were the flaws in it, right?
Yeah. That's that. I have to wonder, that the development history on Metroid Prime is just absolutely fascinating, and that I'm sure a lot of other developers besides Retro have run into that issue of having the they see just all the cracks in the facade and everything, and that. I tell you, that would drive me nuts. I'm just but I that game and GoldenEye, those games are the teams on them were GoldenEye, for example, was just no one made a game before with that team, and with Retro, it was this is their very first game, and these games were made, but with this trial by fire vibe to them rather. And I think that's another reason why I like Metroid Prime 2. I think maybe there was a little bit more love now that they've given birth to the first game, right? I don't want to say that though, because obviously there's a lot of love in the first game too. I don't want to take that away, of course. But
did you know that with the second game, they completed 75% of it in 3 months? Because they were behind schedule. So basically the dark areas, they bit off more than they can chew. And so they ran out of time, so they had to do 75% of the game in 3 months. They had to meet this deadline. So when people criticize Metroid Prime 2 for certain reasons, it's probably because they didn't have time to fully flesh it out the way they wanted to, say the dark areas or the Sky Temple keys, or just with the insane difficulty in some sections. It's really fascinating as well because with that, and even with the original Metroid Prime, because it's a combination of East and Western design kind of fusing together.
Yeah. I've always found that fascinating, the collaboration between both studios. I think that's what made the game really, really good. Is that hybrid mentality So basically, I notice how a lot of games, especially American games, they're they're catered specifically for that American audience, and it's like it's really hard to like export it to other countries, right? Whereas I've noticed that like games like Silent Hill, Metroid Prime, that like especially with the fact that, you know, Metroid Prime had that American developer, I think that really elevated the game to something, you know, again, just that I think it was the right place, right time. The best designers, the best graphic artists, best sound people. I don't think we're gonna see like you know, unless a lot of things happen in the video game industry. I think those days of like those small teams making these really great games, like you look at AAA titles right now, and it's like
huge.
200. Yeah, it's just huge. Yeah,
huge behemoths.
So,
but yeah, it's interesting because Metroid has always been Nintendo's black sheep. It sells way better in the West. It doesn't do very well in Japan. So then I think even Nintendo have a problem in terms of like its identity, because because they're Japanese, they don't know exactly how to cater to solely the Western market. Like, because if you think of their design philosophies and even how they market things, they primarily put Japan first and then the rest of the world second.
Absolutely.
But there's times where they get it right with, say, Zelda. Like, that's way bigger in West than it is in Japan, but yet they killed it with Breath of the Wild, which is an amazing game. So it's probably a good thing that it's with Retro. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
So, but who knows? I mean, the Prime 4 seems to be going through the same problems the original Metroid Prime did in terms of the design process and things being cancelled and changed. And so, yeah, who knows what will happen.
I'm really hopeful. I have, you know, again, I have to express that, you know, I'm a casual gamer. I don't play games a lot anymore. So what I say about, you know, the current video game thing, that's from an outsider's perspective, right? I don't have a Switch. I don't, you know, but
it's fully understood. Don't worry. Gamers can be some of the worst people when it comes to criticizing things. So
exactly.
So maybe it's probably a good thing. I mean, if you go online and go to some of those forums, they're pretty bad sometimes. So
and after, you know, getting a sneak peek of like what goes on in the industry and whatnot, and, you know, trying to, you know, get a job and stuff in the industry and seeing what goes on and stuff, you know, I it's a little bit sobering in terms of like, you know, like, okay, this is still a day job. This is still, you know, this isn't the, you know, but because I'm hopeful for Metroid Prime 4. I think I will say, like, you know, this is a completely different retro from 20 years ago. So, you know, but I'm sure that they're going to do something that's going to make a lot of people happy. It's Nintendo, and the fact that they were smart enough to go, hey, this is not going to be up to par. We're going to have to delay the game, you know. I think it was probably the right move.
Final question before I wrap up.
Yes.
If the opportunity came up to, say, work under Yamamoto-san on Metroid Prime 4, would you do it if the opportunity arises? Even if the pay wasn't that great initially, would you still do it? Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Good man. Good man. That's what I want to hear. Yeah.
No, just you know, I'll be an intern. I'll get the coffee. No, like,
sometimes that's what you got to do. Yeah.
So yeah, got to be the gopher, you know. But like, yeah, no, I would. That would be an absolute amazing thing. I would know. Yeah, that'd be really nice.
Well, fans will probably be the one to make it happen because they make stuff go viral. They get the words out. They get the word out there. Even if you or me are unable to do that. So yeah, I hope everything works out for you, man. I really, really do. You're a talented guy.
Thank you so much, Reece.
And yeah, so if anyone wants to follow you, your Metroid stuff and your original material, where's the best place for them to go? Where's all your social media?
I have my YouTube's my main social media. It's so just Google Synamax, Synamax, and that's where I have all my uploads of both original music and Metroid music. I have my Bandcamp, cinemax.bandcamp.com, where you could purchase or donate. any of the tracks that you hear on my YouTube channel. I also have a Twitter and an Instagram, but I don't use those as often. But if you want to add yourself to those, follow and subscribe and all that good stuff, by all means, please do.
Cool. Well, hey man, it's been awesome to chat to you. Thanks so much.
Likewise.
I feel it's cool because like in New Zealand, Nintendo is kind of dead in the water. Like this stuff is pretty unknown here, so I can't really talk to many local people about this stuff. So it's cool to get to chat to you. So yeah, that's the show anyway, guys. Make sure you share, like, and subscribe. Support the bro Synamax, and yeah, stay safe. See you later.